Did you know even monsters have cravings? Apparently fried chicken might just be a universal favorite. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your slightly under-the-weather host. Don't worry, it's nothing serious. Tonight's episode brings you a chilling mix of real-life encounters with the unknown. From roadside beasts to unsettling events in everyday places, these stories are bound to send a shiver down your spine. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for the strange, the eerie, and the unexplained. Let's begin. Story 1. Beside a funeral home from rural mythos. I've lived in my house for decades, and for as long as I can remember, the building next door was an abandoned funeral home. I say was because about a year ago that changed. It started with vans pulling up at all hours, renovations and fresh coats of paint. Within months, the decaying structure, once a splintered, broken place with shattered windows, was transformed, restored to its former glory, ready for business again. Then came the ornate new sign on the lawn, Lucian Funeral Home. At first, I wasn't thrilled about living next to a functioning funeral home, but I told myself it was better than the alternative. At least it was no longer a crumbling, haunted-looking husk. For a while it seemed normal, almost pleasant in a way. But I never could have imagined that the beautiful, polished version of that building would terrify me more than the abandoned one ever did. And yet here I am, praying every night that it shuts down again, that the people running it pack up and leave, and that the building is left to rot until it finally collapses into an empty lot. At first, the only unsettling thing was watching them bring in the bodies. My back porch faces the side of the funeral home where they unload them. There's no proper loading bay, just an elevated double door, and they only bring the bodies in at night. Sometimes, when I go outside for a smoke, I see them pull the hearse around, backing it up to the building. As it gets close, the double doors swing open, and a man inside reaches for the stretcher, pulling it smoothly into the building. There's some kind of rail system on the floor that it slides into. It's morbid, I know, but how can you not take a peek? That's how it started. Just the occasional guilty glance while I smoked. One night, I had a rough day, stressful enough that I stepped outside for a second smoke, much later than usual. It was brutally cold, but I bundled up and took my usual spot on the porch. I wasn't looking at the funeral home this time. Instead, I was scanning the tree line, searching for the little rabbit that sometimes nibbles on the lawn at night. I took a slow drag from my cigarette. Everything else was dark. Then, in an instant, the entire backyard exploded with light. The floodlights from the funeral home, ones I'd only seen used a handful of times, blazed to life as bright as midday. Squinting, I turned toward the building. A figure emerged from the back door, the same man who usually unloaded the bodies. But this time, he wasn't pushing a stretcher, he was dragging something wrapped in a white sheet. I watched frozen as he trudged across the lawn, tugging the sheet-covered bundle behind him. He stopped halfway between the building and the tree line, then simply left it there. Without hesitation, he turned and walked back inside. What the heck had I just seen? The obvious questions flooded my mind. Why was he out so late? What's under that sheet? And more importantly, why did he just leave it there? I stood and stepped toward the edge of the porch, squinting and trying to make out any details. The sheet flapped in the breeze, revealing nothing. Whatever was inside it was small but heavy. The way he dragged it made that much clear. Then, without warning, the lights cut off. Darkness swallowed everything. A long moment passed. Then, I flicked my cigarette into the grass and turned toward my door. Whoosh! The floodlights roared back to life. I whipped around. The yard was empty, and the sheet-covered bundle was gone. From that night on, it became a pattern. Once a week, always on Sundays, the man would emerge in the dead of night. He would drag something wrapped in a sheet to the same spot in the yard, turn off the lights, and when they came back on, the sheet would be gone. At first, I tried to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, but then I noticed something else. Every Monday morning, just after dawn, he would walk into the woods bordering our properties, carrying an empty black trash bag. A few minutes later, he would reappear, the bag now full. At some point, curiosity turned to paranoia. I just had that sinking feeling that something wrong was going on. Was it organ harvesting or some kind of drug exchange? The possibilities were endless. Each one in my head was worse than the last. I knew it sounded crazy, but not crazier than a man dragging a sheet-wrapped bundle into his backyard, which then proceeded to vanish into thin air. I had to know the truth, so I made a plan. Next Sunday, when he brought that sheet into the yard and shut off the lights, I would be ready. This time, I wouldn't just be peeking from my porch, I'd be there waiting and watching. I'd finally see what or who was taking it. Sunday night came. I waited in my shed, hidden in the shadows of my backyard. The cold was brutal, making my fingers numb even with my gloves on. I must have smoked half a pack too, my nerves rattling. I'd been out there for hours. The later it got, the more I doubted myself. Maybe it wasn't going to happen tonight, I thought. Maybe I should just go back inside before I froze to death. But just as I started to rise, slivers of light sliced through the cracks in the shed's walls. My breath stopped. It was happening. I pressed my face to the wooden slats and peered through the gaps. There he was, the man dragging that same sheet-wrapped shape. Excitement and dread twisted in my gut. I was really doing this, and soon I'd find out the truth. As he disappeared back inside, the floodlights cut out, plunging the yard into darkness. This is it, now or never. My mind screamed at my body to move and sprint, but for a split second, I hesitated. Then my courage took over. I burst from my shed, feet pounding against the ground as I raced across the lawn, reaching the side of the funeral home. I pressed my back against the wall. I peered out into the backyard. There was no moon tonight. My eyes were still adjusting, but I could just make out the pale outline of the sheet-wrapped object lying in the grass. No movement, no sound. I expected it to simply vanish before my eyes, to dissolve into nothing. But then something shifted near it. Then another, and another. Dark shapes, low to the ground, barely taller than the thing wrapped in the sheet. They had no distinct features, just shifting silhouettes in the dark, circling the bundle like vultures. For a few long seconds they moved silent and methodical. Then they blurred together, merging into a single writhing shadow, and then nothing. The movement stopped. The shapes disappeared. I squinted into the black, but the yard was too dark. Trying to process what I had just seen, I was blinded when the floodlights roared back to life. I flinched. When my vision cleared, my stomach lurched. The yard was empty, and the sheet was gone. Confusion twisted into fear, then nausea. I pushed off the wall and sprinted back to my house, heart pounding. The second I was inside, I slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with shaky fingers. I paced about the living room, every few minutes peeking through the blinds at the funeral home's yard, hoping I wouldn't see something I couldn't explain, or perhaps hoping to see something that could explain what I saw, but I was no closer to understanding than before. The only thing I knew for sure was that more than one person was taking whatever was left in that yard, but their size. Well, they were small. They must have been hunched down or maybe crawling. Yeah, that had to be it, I thought. Crawling on hands and knees. That's the only thing that makes sense, I told myself. For hours I sat on my couch, running through endless scenarios in my mind. Was it some kind of ritual, a black market deal, something worse? My exhaustion eventually caught up to me, and I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. I was awakened by a loud knocking. Groggy, I sat up and rubbed my face. I saw sunlight through my blinds. It was morning. The knock came again. Still half asleep, I shuffled toward the door, then stopped cold when I glanced out the side window. My breath caught in my chest. It was him. The man from the funeral home. What do I do? I couldn't ignore him. He'd already seen me look out the window. He knew I was home. Did he see me last night? Is that why he's here? No, he couldn't have. It was too dark. He was already inside when I ran over. I forced myself to stay calm. I took a breath and opened the door, doing my best to feign ignorance. "Hey, what's up?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. He gave me a friendly smile. "Sorry to bother you so early," he said, nodding toward the funeral home. "I work next door. I was hoping you could help me out with something." I swallowed hard but kept a straight expression. Sure. With what exactly?" "Well, last night we had a trespasser," he said, his smile never faltering. "Our side camera caught someone skulking around the building. It looked like they came onto the property from your side and left the same way." He paused and studied me. "I know you sit on your porch at night to smoke, so I was wondering, did you see anything?" My heart pounded against my ribs. "No, sorry," I said. I didn't notice anyone last night. It was quiet around here, same as always." His smile faded for a long, uncomfortable moment. He just looked at me like he was studying my face, searching for something. The silence stretched on until finally he spoke. "Oh, well, figured as much, but I wanted to ask anyway." His eyes flicked past me, scanning my home for a moment. I shifted, blocking more of the doorway. "Yeah, sorry, I couldn't be of more help. Do you have a description of the guy? Maybe I'd recognize him." He shrugged. "Not really. The cameras aren't the best, so he couldn't make them out too well." A small wave of relief loosened my chest. "So, he didn't get a good look. Maybe you should call the cops. Someone else in the area might have noticed something you didn't." At that, his gaze snapped back to me. His smile returned, wider this time, but something about it still felt off. No need for that," he said smoothly. "Besides, I prefer to handle things in-house, if you know what I mean." I swallowed. He let the words hang between us for a moment before adding, "But if you do see anything, let me know. I tolerate a lot, but not this. Funeral homes are no place for prying." He continued to smile, but the meaning was clear. Without a word, he turned and walked off my porch, not bothering to excuse himself. I shut the door the second he stepped off and locked it behind him. I knew exactly what he was trying to do: intimidate me, scare me into minding my own business. But if anything, it had the opposite effect. Now more than ever, I needed to know what was going on. Without wasting any time, I decided to go straight into the woods. It was still early. Maybe he hadn't been out there yet. If I moved fast, I might be able to find whatever he was retrieving, or at least something that could shed light on this. I pulled on my boots, slipped out the back door, and stepped into the dense tree line that bordered our properties. The forest was easy to navigate this time of year. Most of the undergrowth was dead, and the ground was littered with fallen leaves. My footsteps crunched softly as I moved deeper, scanning the forest floor for anything that might have been strange. I then noticed them, faint drag marks here and there. The leaves had been disturbed, pushed aside like something heavy had been pulled through. The trail wasn't perfectly clear, but it had a direction. I kept losing and picking it back up, following the subtle signs as best I could. After several minutes of tracking, the marks led me into a small clearing. At the clearing's edge, something caught my eye: an old, rotting set of wooden bleachers. The once blue paint curled and flaked away in strips, revealing splintered wood beneath. I moved closer. The drag marks continued, leading under the bleachers. I crouched down and peered into the shadows beneath the wooden seats. There it was, a wide sheet, torn to shreds and soaked in what appeared to be blood. Tangled within the fabric were ripped pieces of plastic, also stained red. The ground beneath was dark, damp and disturbed, like something had been violently ripped apart. There, my mind racked in my skull, looking at it. It looked like something from a scary movie. Then, I noticed something else. Tiny, bloody handprints smeared across the fabric and surrounding the sheet. Imprinted in the blood-soaked earth were small footprints, dozens of them, no bigger than a toddler's. My brain struggled to process the horrifying scene before me, but before I could think too much, I heard it. The sound of leaves and twigs crunching underfoot. Someone was coming. The noise came from the direction I had just come from. Panic surged through me. I could not be seen here. I bolted out of the clearing, ducking behind a tree just as the footsteps grew closer. Pressing my back against the rough bark, I held my breath and listened. The footsteps stopped briefly, then resumed. Slow, deliberate. I risked a glance around the trunk, just enough to see it was him, the man from the funeral home. He walked into the clearing, heading straight for the bleachers, a black trash bag clutched in his hand. I snapped my head back behind cover, heart pounding. For a few agonizing moments, I listened as he rustled around beneath the bleachers. Then his footsteps started up again, retreating back the way he came. I waited minutes. Only when I was absolutely sure he was gone did I finally step out from my hiding spot, moving cautiously. I made my way back toward the bleachers, checking over my shoulder with every step, paranoid that he might be watching. When I reached the spot where the bloodied sheet had been, I crouched down and peered underneath. It was gone. The sheet, the plastic, every trace of the scene I had just witnessed. Even the dirt had been disturbed, kicked around and brushed over, hiding the blood and erasing the tiny footprints. It was like nothing had been there at all. I made my way out of the woods and back to my house. My mind was a storm, and I was freaked out. That was 3. These unsettling occurrences have only escalated. I hear the sounds more frequently now, at night, when the world around me is still, and my nerves are shot from all the tension. The knocks on the walls have turned into scrapes, dragging noises that seem to come from all directions. I've checked the outside of my house countless times, expecting to find something, but there's nothing, no one ever there. The footsteps have shifted too, no longer just on the roof, but sometimes across the floorboards beneath me. It's as if something is walking around inside the house when I'm not there. It sounds insane, but every time I come home, I check the doors, the windows, and always find them locked, as I left them. The worst part, though, is the silence. The overwhelming silence that fills the spaces between the noises, making me doubt my senses. Sometimes I hear faint whispers, low, raspy voices, like they're coming from the walls themselves. I've tried to convince myself it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I know I've heard them. I can't escape the feeling that something is watching me. It's there, in the corner of my vision, waiting for me to make a mistake. Every time I step out of my front door, I feel it. The eyes, the watchful presence that lingers just out of reach. I've even started to avoid looking at the funeral home. It's impossible to ignore, but I try. It looms over everything, dark and menacing. I can't escape the thought that the things coming from that place are somehow tied to me now, that I've drawn their attention, and it won't be long before they come for me. But I'm not ready to go back into those woods. I've seen enough to know that whatever is happening isn't something I can fix. The truth is far worse than I ever imagined, and I'm terrified of finding out just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Every time I hear the knocks, the footsteps, I wonder, is it them? Are they getting closer? There's no safe place for me anymore. Not here, not in my own house. The funeral home is awake again, and so is whatever it's feeding. I just pray that when the time comes, I'll be ready, because I can't let them win. Story 2. Strange sounds from Eden. I'll start by saying that this is only one of many stories I have. I've experienced strange things since I was small, and a lot of them involve other people, so I know it's not just my imagination or me hallucinating. This story, though, is the one that still makes me tear up if I think about it too long. It happened in 2 parts, really. It began when I was about 10 or so. My father spent years in the Marine Corps, so we moved a few times growing up. Not as much as a lot of other people, but still plenty of times. We had just moved back to the area I was born in, and my parents were looking to rent a house so that we didn't have to live in military housing. We looked at a few places before finally settling on a house, and the start of this story takes place in that house. The house was small. My parents had their room, my brother had his, and I shared a room with my sister, the same way things had been set up for most of my life so far. The house was in a nice, quiet suburb that I would take regular walks through. It was a good and safe neighborhood. My biggest concerns were starting at a new school in the middle of the year, and whether or not I'd get to stay in band. My brother was the first to experience anything weird in that house. This was especially strange, as we had lived in places before where everyone experienced something unusual, except him. He said he would hear voices at night, people talking down the hall in the living room, but when he'd go to look, no one was ever there. We didn't write him off exactly, but because no one else had experienced anything yet and it was just strange voices, we all chalked it up to dreams or maybe even neighbors outside. That was until this night. I was having a nightmare. I've had nightmares regularly since I was young, a consequence of unrelated trauma. This one seemed different from my usual nightmares. Almost every nightmare I've ever had takes place in a location entirely made up for whatever I'm dreaming that night. This time, however, I was dreaming of the house I was in. I was lying in my bed, staring at the doorway. I could see my brother's bedroom across the hall and the bathroom next to it. Everything looked exactly as it did in real life. Suddenly, just outside the doorway, an angel lamp my mother had appeared. The lamp had always been present in my life. My grandfather had a matching one in his house, so I was very familiar with it. It looked almost like stained glass, and the angel held up a lute. In the dream, the angel sat motionless until it began to grow larger and larger. Soon, it took up the entire doorway, A huge change from the near 3-foot height it had been before. For some reason, this terrified me. That was when the noise began. A large, heavy, and deep tone that rattled me. I woke to the sound of my sister screaming in the bed right next to mine. Our parents rushed into the room, and the whole time she kept mentioning the sound I'd heard. It wasn't just in my nightmare. It had been real. Our parents had heard it too. Our father checked the house, looking in every room and then outside. He told us it was probably just a glitch from his fancy home theater speakers, but I knew that wasn't true. We all did, but it was an explanation rooted in reality and reason, so we left it at that. Fast forward years. I was visiting my family from college, something I could only do occasionally because my school was hours away and I didn't have a car. The house my parents lived in was a nice place. They'd moved into it after I left for school, so for me it was unfamiliar, but I liked it well enough. Plenty of odd things happened in that house, but I really don't know if they were related to this particular event or not. There were 2 full baths in the house, but the master bath included a huge tub, big enough for me to sink into completely with room to spare. The bathroom was at the back of the bedroom, which was the farthest room from the front door. Strangely, it matched the first incident in that way. My bed was against the wall with a window, the furthest from the front door. I could have been anywhere. I was in the bath, relaxing. I had my phone with me. Don't judge. I never dropped it in the water and mostly just scrolled through Tumblr before getting washed up. So I wasn't paying much attention to the world outside my little screen. That's when I heard a knock. I thought it was from the bathroom door and assumed it was one of my parents or maybe one of my siblings. "What?" I called. No answer. I repeated myself louder, but still nothing. I texted our family group chat. "Was someone at the door?" A moment later, the reply, "We're all in the backyard." Strange, I thought, but oh well. We had 3 dogs, so it easily could have been one of them. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't seem right. Was it a knock on the bathroom door? Maybe it was an animal on the roof. The longer I spent trying to puzzle it out, the more uneasy I felt. A thud against the window made me freeze. I wouldn't have thought much of such an innocuous sound if it weren't for the fact that, although the window sat just above the toilet on the inside, on the outside it was impossible to reach without a short ladder at the very least. I stared at the window, watching as though I could see anything through the blinds. Then came a sound that chilled me to the bone. It's hard to describe. It wasn't that booming single tone I'd heard before. It was a wailing like a deer, but not quite right. It rose and fell like a siren, but it was mixed with a garbled sound like 3 sounds played over each other. Something about whatever this sound was made me feel like I was in danger. Never before this, and never since, have I felt so much like prey. When it comes to fight or flight or freeze, I've always been a freezer. I sat in the bath with my heart racing, every sense tuned into that sound and whatever was outside that window. I waited and waited, bracing for more. Eventually, curiosity won out over fear. It's always been my fatal flaw. It felt like it had been an hour, but according to my phone, it had only been about 15 minutes. I climbed out as quietly as I could and peeked through the blinds, opening them only enough for me to see outside. There was nothing. No deer, no sign of anyone, and no sign of anything else. I texted my family again, asking if they'd heard that. They had no idea what I was talking about. I thought they might have been playing a prank on me. They were fond of doing that after all. I went out to the backyard, expecting them to laugh about how they'd scared me. No one did. In fact, they thought I'd gotten out of the bath after I texted them the first time. They've always owned up to pranks once the fun's over. I don't know if it was them playing tricks. Besides, like I said, other strange things happened in that house. It wasn't the last time I was scared half to death in those walls. I haven't heard anything strange like that since. I've experienced bad drug trips, briefly struggled with exploding head syndrome, and had plenty of scary things happen otherwise. But nothing has filled me with such a primal fear as these 2 incidents. The most common answer I've gotten is sky trumpets, especially since the first incident started with a nightmare about an angel with a lute. I'm not Christian, and I haven't been for a long time, so I'm not sure how much stock I put into angels blaring trumpets. I've also had people suggest not deer and certain unsavory creatures you should not mention by name. I really don't know what it could be. The incidents happened years apart, and it's been years since the last. I can't help but worry that in 4 more years, I'll hear something again. Story 3. Werewolf ate my fried chicken. From Daniel. I still don't know what we saw that night, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to. All I know is it started with fried chicken. I was with Em, my best friend since the 10th grade. We had just finished another endless Tuesday shift at the factory, sweaty, oil-stained, and absolutely starving. You ever get the kind of tired that just sinks into your bones? That's where we were. The only thing keeping us alive was the idea of something greasy, salty, and dipped in sauce. So naturally, we pulled into the KFC on the edge of town. I'll set the scene. This KFC isn't your standard strip mall variety. It's set a little off-route, just before you hit the state forest. An old building, red roof chipped with peeling sunburn, parking lot always half empty, lit by flickering halogen poles that hum louder than they probably should. The woods loom right up behind the building like the forest is trying to take it back for itself, but they made the chicken fresh, which is rare, so we didn't complain. We ordered a bucket, 12-piece, extra crispy, 2 biscuits each, coleslaw and mashed potatoes too. I still remember how the box was warm in my lap as we sat on the hood of his rusted-out Honda, our legs dangling over the edge. The air was cooling down then, late spring chill, setting in, and the smell of fried food curled around us like a blanket. I'm telling you, Em said, mouth half full, if I win the lotto, I'm buying a whole darn franchise just so I never have to wait in line again. I laughed and sipped at a flat Pepsi. You wouldn't make it a week, you'd eat the profits. He held up a thigh like a trophy. Worth it. We were mid-bite when we heard it. A branch cracked. It was heavy. We turned toward the tree line. The woods behind the KFC are dense and dark even in daylight. At night, they look like they go on forever, and from those woods, something stepped out. It was a shadow at first, broad and tall, but when it moved closer, we saw it fully. It was no man. Not entirely. I guess not a wolf either. This thing was about 7 feet tall easily. Its arms were thin and stretched, hands tipped with black claws. The thing had thick and patchy fur from head to toe, and grey that turned into white across its chest, matted in places. Legs were bent like an animal's, but it was walking upright. But somehow I knew that the eyes were human. They looked tired, but also hungry. Em dropped his biscuit, which hit the road with a thud. The creature turned, its head right to us. Neither of us moved. It didn't growl, it didn't charge. It stood there and stared, only feet away. Eventually, Em whispered, "What the heck is that?" "I don't know," I said. "Don't move." The creature sniffed the air slowly and carefully, then took one step, closer, then another. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my vision got all spotty. My hands were slick with chicken grease and sweat. The creature looked at the bucket between us, then back at me. "I think it's hungry," I said. Em blinked. "You're not serious." But I was already sliding off the hood, moving slowly like you would around a stray dog. I grabbed a drumstick from the bucket and held it out, arm extended like some weird fast food peace offering. I know in hindsight this is the stupidest thing to do, and I'm not sure what compelled me to do it, but the beast tilted its head, nostrils flaring. Then, with surprising delicacy, it stepped forward and took the drumstick from my hand, not snatching, but taking. I felt claws brush against my fingers. They were cold, and flakes of dirt brushed off them. I can't believe I actually freaking touched it. It backed up a couple steps, then sat down the way a raccoon would. Sit. Then, right there on the cracked pavement, it began to eat. We watched it, just stunned. It didn't gobble or tear either. It ate like it had all the time in the world. Didn't even break eye contact. Em whispered, "Are we high?" "Unless we're sharing the same hallucination, I think this is real," responded. The creature licked its lips, made a low, satisfied sound, like a grunt. Then it looked back at the bucket. We handed over 2 more pieces, a thigh and a wing. It reached out slowly, each time careful, like it knew sudden moves might scare us off. After the 3rd piece, it stood, looked at both of us again, and gave a small yip like some sort of happy dog. Without a sound, it turned and walked back into the woods like a person. Just like that, it was gone. We sat there for a while after, not saying a word. Eventually, M said, "We never tell anyone about this. They're going to think we're nuts." "I know. You going to tell anyone?" "Nope." "Me neither." He looked at the bucket, still half full. Still hungry? Kind of. We finished the bucket in silence, left the bones in the box, wiped our hands on napkins that did nothing, and drove home in the dark. The next day, we came back. Same time, same KFC, same order. We left a couple of extra pieces on the edge of the lot near the trees. They were gone by morning. We never saw the creature again, but me and him still talk about it often. I know feeding it was stupid, but to be completely honest, I didn't feel pure terror when I saw it like many people might say in these encounters. I felt a sort of respect and fascination, I guess. Like when you see a lion or a tiger, you aren't necessarily scared unless it's ripping your throat out, but you respect it, and you keep your distance. I think M felt the same way. No, it may not be the most intense or interesting experience, but it does get you thinking. Maybe these monsters are also just creatures trying to get by. Its face showed pure emotion on it, and I won't be forgetting it anytime soon. Story 4. I used to think people just made this stuff up. Monsters, cryptids, strange creatures lurking in the dark. Great for ghost stories and campfire tales, but not something that actually happened, not in the real world, not to people like me. That changed one cold October night. I was working the closing shift at a small diner in Elkhorn. It was just after 10 p.m. when I finally clocked out. The roads were silent, no traffic, no streetlights once you got out of town. I took the back way home, down Bray Road. Locals whispered about that road. You'd hear stuff like, "The Bray Road beast will get you," back in middle school, but I'd never given it much thought. That night, though, there was fog. Thick, heavy fog, clinging to the fields, creeping over the road like it had a mind of its own. My headlights barely made a dent. I turned the radio down. Even the static felt wrong, like sound itself was a disturbance. That's when I saw it. A flash of fur, just a blur, and then a thud against the front of my car. I slammed the brakes. Tires screeched, and I came to a shaking stop. My first thought was I'd hit a deer. Scared but needing to know, I stepped out. I found the animal. A raccoon, I think, or something close. It had already been mangled, as if something else had gotten to it long before I did. I crouched down to get a better look, and then I heard it. A rustling sound, deep and heavy, something big moving in the brush. This wasn't a squirrel or a rabbit. This was something else, something massive. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stayed still. Then it stepped out. At first it reminded me of a bear, but bears don't move like that, even on two legs. This thing had shoulders too broad, limbs too long. It stood maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur. It walked upright, like a man, but its head was that of a wolf. Long snout, sharp teeth, pointed ears twitching at every sound. Its eyes glowed yellow, horrible and full of something I can only call evil. It stared at me like I was something it could eat. I didn't move. It crouched down, picked up the raccoon like it was nothing, then stood tall again, watching. We stayed that way for a second that felt like forever. Finally, my limbs kicked in. I stumbled backward, never taking my eyes off it. I flung the car door open, dove in, and slammed it shut. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. When the engine roared, I floored it. That should have been the end. I should have driven off and never looked back. But I did look back, and it was chasing me. It ran on 2 legs, those long strides, closing the distance like nothing. I was pushing 60, then 70, and it kept up. Those glowing eyes locked onto mine in the mirror. Then, just as suddenly, it veered into the cornfield and vanished like it was never there. I didn't sleep much that night. For a while, I didn't even tell anyone. But later I heard the stories. Farmers, teenagers, even a cop or two, people who'd seen it, people who'd found claw marks on their barns or livestock torn apart. All of them had their own encounters. All of them described the same thing. They call it the Beast of Bray Road. Maybe you've heard of it. I never drive that way anymore. Doesn't matter how late I am. I take the long route. I saw it. It saw me. And I know it remembers. Story 5. The Long Man. From a random guy, this happened about 3 or 4 years ago when COVID was dying down, and I was 22 or 23 years old. I had moved into a new house with my girlfriend. The house had 3 bedrooms and a big porch where you could just sit down and chill. The backyard was small, with a trampoline that we were going to take apart and give away to some charity so we could have more backyard space. A few months later, we took it down and shipped it. The night we did, I heard footsteps from the backyard going onto our porch, and then they stopped. Then it sounded like something was climbing the wall. I heard this noise, like tap tap, step step, over and over, about 10 times, until it stopped right at my window. My heart and mind were racing by that point, trying to think of logical explanations for these noises, a bird or a bat, maybe a small land animal climbing up the outside wall, but that didn't explain the footsteps, and then came the knocking, over and over again, tap tap tap. I looked at my window, but even though my blinds were semi-see-through, I couldn't see a shadow through the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut immediately, waiting for hours in the dark, knuckles tapping at glass, keeping me awake. In the morning, when orange light burst through my blinds, the tapping had stopped. I got out of bed and looked out bravely, and saw something that still haunts me today. It was a very long and lanky arm with a pale-looking hand, and it seemed to be wearing a tattered suit. I saw the arm being dragged around the corner off my porch steps, but I could not see the body or anything else, as it was already around the corner. I closed the window, but of course I did the thing that starts all horror films. I forgot to lock it. When I told my girlfriend about it, she didn't react very much. She said I was hallucinating from being so tired, as I'd had a late shift at work until 4 a.m. the night before. Months later, I was sitting on my sofa watching TV, as my girlfriend was with her friends somewhere when I heard footsteps on the roof right above me. I knew it was that same long man again, and of course I was terrified, but it was on my roof, and what harm could it do if it was there? And that's when it hit me. I have a second floor, and I don't usually open windows, so I'm not really used to locking them up there. I began to panic. I ran out of my house, frantically running to my neighbor's place, starting to spam their doorbell. Fortunately, they were home and extremely ticked off when they answered. I yelled at her to call the cops because someone had broken into my home. As she ran back in, I looked at my house and saw half of its face peering from below the window. Its eyes were looking straight at me. Or that's what I think it was trying to do, because it didn't have eyes. It looked more like just sockets. Its hair was just a bunch of strands going in all directions, and it had very pale skin, the same color as that hand I saw before. My neighbor came back, saying that the cops were on their way and that it would be about 15 minutes. When the cops showed up, they searched my house and came back saying that they didn't find anything, just an open window. They asked me to come with them to see if any valuables were taken, so we did a scan of the house, but nothing was out of place. The police told me that it was probably a burglar who got in, but didn't find anything up there and heard me downstairs, so quickly decided to get out rather than risk getting caught. I knew it wasn't a burglar. They don't look like that. People don't look like that. And I knew whatever that long man was, it wasn't looking for valuables. Story 6. It had to be a UFO. From Flower Mama. It was a little after 9 p.m. the night before school started in August. My teenage daughter had gone to Albuquerque with her boyfriend, along with his mom and sister, to get some last-minute school shopping done. We lived in a very rural area about 10 miles down Highway 94 from Romeroville, on the outskirts of Las Vegas, New Mexico. I don't mind saying where we lived at the time. We've since moved away. I had to pick up my daughter at the gas station where Interstate 25 and Highway 94 meet up. That was always the meeting spot between town and our house because we lived so far out in the middle of nowhere, and people don't want to drive all the way out there to pick up or drop off a kid. I was getting into my SUV and I noticed a faint red glow far off over the hills. I thought it was strange. I began to drive slowly down my driveway, which was about a half-mile long. I was somewhat keeping an eye on that red glow. I got about halfway down the driveway when I realized the red was flashing lights. It looked so strange. I stopped the vehicle and called my husband to tell him about it, and also to have him on the phone with me when I got all the way down to our gate. As I was creeping forward, the lights were coming more and more into view. I was starting to get scared. This didn't feel right. When I finally stopped at our gate, I saw a sequence of flashing red lights on top of the plateau across the street. There were about 7 large red lights flashing one at a time in a row. They flashed like and so on. I got goosebumps all over. I tried to think about what they could be, a logical explanation. There was a road that zigzagged up the side of the hill to the top, where there were some cell towers and electric poles, so maybe it was emergency vehicles or a roadblock of some sort. But really, there was no way it could have been either one of those things. The lights were much, much too large to be anything like that. Any trucks driving up there in daylight always looked so small and far away. These red lights were huge. It was so weird and out of place with them blinking in a row one at a time like that. It wasn't something I'd seen any emergency lights around here do. Plus, if there was some sort of emergency going on up there, I'm sure there would have been more activity. Sirens, maybe other emergency vehicles, fire trucks or police, something. Not even any vehicles passed by on the highway while I sat there. It was just me and those big blinking red lights. It was really frightening. My husband was still on the phone, comforting me and wishing me luck before we disconnected. I was afraid to get out to open the gate, but I had to get my daughter, so that's what I did. The whole thing lasted about 15 minutes. It was a quiet night otherwise. I think I only passed about 3 cars on my way to the gas station. My daughter was already there waiting for me, so she got right in. While we were heading back home, I told her all about it. I was kind of expecting to see it there, just like when I left, but I didn't see anything. As we got close, I pulled up to our gate, but it was gone. We didn't pass any emergency vehicles or even any big rigs on our way home. It couldn't have been anything other than a big old UFO with huge blinking red lights on top of that plateau. Now I really wish I'd taken a picture or video of it. I didn't at the time, I was too scared. Stupid maybe, but I remember thinking that maybe I would be abducted if I took a picture. I've seen some really creepy and strange things in my life. Even saw a UFO 2 other times, but I'd never seen anything quite like this before. Story 7. This story happened when my wife Alexandria and I were in our early 30s. We had recently gotten married and moved in together. It hadn't even been a month before we both started hearing weird things. Alexandria said she'd heard knocks on the doors when no one was there, or saw things move on their own. We expected the house to be haunted, considering it was built in the late 1800s, so we thought nothing of it. Little things kept happening for months, like our phones ending up in the living room or the fridge door opening on its own. These were minor events until we hit the 1-year mark. We soon found out that my wife was pregnant. The entity didn't seem to like that, though. The activity worsened. Not only did things happen more often, but they began to harm us, especially Alexandria. She woke up with bruises and scratches. She told me she often felt like something was choking her during the night, leaving red marks on her neck. It got so bad that we had to leave. We moved in with her parents and stayed there until the baby was born. We didn't want to risk her or the baby getting hurt. We eventually found another place to live that was within our budget, but it didn't help. Soon after we moved into the new place, we thought everything would go back to normal, but little things continued happening. Our cabinet doors began opening on their own, or the faucet would turn on and off. Just like the old house, things started to get worse. My wife began waking up with bruises again, and I did too. Now with the baby, since we had to get up in the middle of the night more often, we started getting double the bruises. Before long, we noticed our son had large red marks on his right arm. He didn't seem bothered by it, but we were worried it might be hurting both my wife and me, and now our child. We took him to the doctor, and luckily, it seemed to just be a mark, with no pain or serious issue. But we didn't want to risk him getting hurt. So the only logical thing we could think to do was move back in with my wife's family. Fortunately, they let us stay as long as we needed. They understood our concerns. We stayed for about a year, hoping we could escape whatever was hurting our family. Alexandria's family is Christian, which makes me think we were dealing with a demon or something similar because we were fine staying there. No bruises, no phantom movements, nothing. After a while we tried moving into another house, but again it didn't work. The bruises returned, along with the feeling of being choked and the red marks. As before, we had to move back in with Alexandria's parents. We even tried renting an apartment, but that didn't work either. Alexandria's parents suggested we start praying, so we tried that. Every time we felt the choking sensation, we would pray. Each time, the entity would respond with the same loud, terrifying scream that would make our ears ring for what felt like hours, but even after we prayed, it never seemed to stop. These experiences happened about 9 years ago, and we eventually decided to move in with Alexandria's parents for good. They were okay with it, and ever since we've been safe. Our son is healthy, happy, and doesn't remember any of it. Alexandria and I, though, will never forget. Stay safe out there. You never know what you might be dealing with in this world. Story 8. When I look back through my life, I realize there was only one person who remained constant. My parents died when I was young. It's not a heartbreaking thing, since I don't really remember them. I suppose I felt a longing for a life I never lived, a childhood where I wasn't looked at with pity. Still, I learned to live my life regardless. Most of my friends came and went with the seasons, stopping to create memories and share experiences, but never staying long enough to reminisce on them. Partners only stayed long enough to break my heart, provide fodder for my journals, and dwindle my bank accounts. My therapist thinks I have abandonment issues. I like to think I'm just a realist. Not everyone is meant to stay in your life forever. I believe the only constant someone had in life was themselves. I was wrong. I met my constant, unwavering friend on a warm summer's day in the park, on a bench, crying my heart out. I tried not to let breakups affect me. I felt stupid crying over someone, especially if they could so easily throw me away. Even more so if I was the one that threw them away. Most of the time, a good pint of ice cream, a movie that could make me believe in love again, and a playlist of songs to dance or rage to was all it took to make me feel good. Great even. I would be swiping left within 48 hours. This was not like most times. It had been a whopping 120 hours since the breakup, and I was still crying. It was honestly a record at that point. Having broken my previous record of 72 hours, 16-year-old me didn't know what hit her. I made my way to my favorite park, hoping the fresh air and scenery would help me. I was cursing my therapist along the way and planning how I was going to lord over her the fact that I was right. Everybody does leave. At that point, I still held fast to my delusion that I did not have abandonment issues. I walked along the path surrounding the lake and plopped myself onto the third bench in a row of 3. I avoided the first one, not making eye contact as I walked past it. That bench was Thomas's favorite, the bastard. Tears had already begun welling up on the walk over, and I let them flow freely as I stared out towards the lake. Strangers passed me by, ignoring the pathetic woman crying in the middle of the day. I was searching in my purse for my wad of tissues when I saw a flash of white in my peripheral. I glanced up and was met with a single tissue hovering in front of my face. Looking beyond the tissue, my eyes scanned up from a wrinkled hand to a wrinkled arm, and lastly to a wrinkled face. An older gentleman stood beside my bench. His shoulder and back drooped down towards the ground, and his other hand braced on a cane. He provided me with a soft smile, a warm smile, the kind of smile that reached the eyes. "No use crying on a day as nice as this one, sweetheart," he stated, continuing to hold out the tissue as his hand started to shake with the effort. Normally I would bristle at the word sweetheart. I was nobody's sweetheart. But from him, this stranger with the kind smile, it felt only natural for him to call me sweetheart, as if he'd been doing it forever. I straightened up in my seat, abandoning the search of my purse. I grabbed the tissue from him gently, dabbing my eyes dry and blowing my nose. "Thank you," I motioned with the tissue in my hand. He used his now free hand to get a firmer grasp on the cane. Despite the aid, he was still a little unsteady on his feet. I scooched over to the far end of the bench, collecting my purse into my lap. "Here, you can have a seat if you want." I surprised myself with this offer. Normally, my time at the park was a solitary one. I tended to avoid interactions with anyone else and chose the park benches that were the most secluded. He shuffled the last few feet and used the cane to lower himself into the seat. He signified the task as complete with a humph of effort escaping his lips. "Ah," he sighed out. "Thank you. These bones are not what they used to be." He pivoted his torso towards me. "Now, what is making a pretty lady such as yourself cry so hard like you just were?" My cheeks bloomed red and grew hot. I'm not sure why I was embarrassed. I was the one who decided to go out in a very public place and start very publicly crying. "If you tell me it's about some silly little boy, then I might have to hit you with this old cane of mine." I couldn't help but give a half smile at the not-so-veiled threat of harm. "There you go." He swung the cane and the tip of it tapped the side of my shoe. "You were born to smile. I can see that in you. That's a smile that could solve world peace, that is." I let out a small chuckle at the thought. He threw himself back into the bench seat, one hand clutching onto his chest. Panic started to rise as I began to think about how I should have paid attention in CPR class. And that laugh! He continued clutching his chest as his eyes looked towards the heavens. That laugh could do more than solve world peace. Young lady, that could bring hope to generations. The panic died down as I realized I was not about to perform life-saving measures for some old man I just met. I stared over at him incredulously. This old man. This stranger, who, in a matter of seconds, had given me more meaningful compliments than my last partner gave me in months. "Who are you?" I laughed out. It was the only question I could think to ask at the moment. He reached out his hand in greeting. "The name's Bernard. Bernie to my friends." I grasped his hand and was met with a surprisingly firm handshake. "It's nice to meet you, Bernie." I decided then that I would be glad to call this old man my friend. "I'm Lucy." "Lovely name, Lucy." Bernie contemplated for a second. "Now what's got you down today?" I told him about the silly little boy that broke my heart. He did not hit me with his cane when I told him, although I flinched away just in case. I told him about the job that was stressing me out. He told me to just quit. I told him about the novel I was trying to write. He told me to just write it. He told me about himself too, his love for the park and how he walks it daily, his grandchildren that were scattered throughout the country. He told me about his first love, Denise, who broke his heart when he was only 5 years old, and about his true love, Alberta, who helped give him his grandchildren. We talked for a while that day. By the end of our conversation, I was feeling better than any therapy session I'd ever been to. I told him as much too. "Well, how much are you paying your fancy therapist?" he asked. "With insurance, probably $100 a session." "Well, shit, I'll take that in 20s if you got them." I laughed and he cracked a smile. No, I won't make you pay that. I'll take my payment in candy next time I see you." "That sounds like a deal to me, Bernie." We shook on it. "What kind of candy am I buying you?" "I like to stick to the cliche, Lucy, so I'll take some caramel candies." "You got it, Bernie." I stood up from the bench. "I'll give you the whole pack next time I see you." Bah. I made my way back to the park the next afternoon, caramel candies in tow. I was thankfully not crying this time. After my first talk with Bernie, I didn't feel the need to cry again. I caught him approaching as he slowly shuffled up to me. I made room for him on the bench, and he took his seat. "Lucy, my friend, back again so soon." I reached into my purse and pulled out the bag of candy. "I like to pay my debts on time, Bernie." His eyes lit up as he reached for the bag. "Ah, you lovely thing. You got the big bag too, I see." "Only the best." He struggled to grip the bag and pry it open. I reprimanded myself for not opening it for him first. As I debated asking if he needed help, he thrust the bag back towards me. "Here, sweetheart. Would you mind? These old hands are not what they used to be." "Not at all." I popped the bag open and handed it back to him. "Thank you, Lucy." He grabbed 2 out of the bag and placed 1 in my hand. "I like to share the wealth." "All right, Bernie. Last we spoke, you were going to give me sage advice on relationships." "Yes, I was. A lady like you should not stay single for long. I'll tell you what worked with my lovely wife, Alberta." His eyes sparkled when he spoke of her, although there was a tinge of sadness surrounding it too. "We met in 1962. I was 18 years old and had just started my freshman year of college. We had English class together. Oh, she was a vision. I was enraptured from the moment I saw her, Lucy. I was too shy to do anything about it. Of course." He shook his head at the thought. "To think we could have had even more years together if I would have just spoken up sooner." He paused, indulging in the extra moments they could have shared. I made sure to sit beside her for each class. One day, she was one of the last ones to show up. Most of the seats were taken, and some fellow tried sitting in the open seat beside me. I ended up bribing the guy that I would write his next essay if he'd switch seats to another chair. Alberta arrived just as the guy took the only other empty chair, so she came and sat beside me. "I think I got the guy an A on his paper," he expressed proudly. Anyways, I finally got the courage to ask her to proofread my essay. We started talking after that and became the best of friends. I knew I loved her within weeks, but of course, I didn't want to ruin our friendship. He reached down and pulled out 2 more caramels, handing me one. We were walking around inside this park when she kissed me. He smiled widely at that thought. "So wait, she kissed you first?" I asked, invested in the tale he was weaving. "Oh yeah," he chuckled. I was too much of a wimp to do it myself. She told me that after the fact too. She said she knew I would never do it first, so she figured she would just get it out of the way. She sounds like my kind of girl. Oh yes, I already know you guys would have gotten along. He had made comments throughout talking with him that he was a widow. The reason why his smiles and tales about her were sown through with grief. We were able to share 53 amazing years together. She gave me 4 beautiful children, and those children gave us 10 wonderful grandchildren. So, according to you, Bernie, I should find a guy and kiss him in this park, and I'll find my happily ever after. He tapped my shoe with his cane. Now you're getting it, kid. Much to my surprise, I did end up finding a guy to kiss in that very park. We met while I was walking along the lake, listening to my music, and his frisbee smacked me in the back of the head. He was a gentleman, of course, offered to buy me a cup of coffee to apologize. We spent the next few days hanging out. We made it back to the park for a picnic, and I pulled him towards me and kissed him. I figured if Alberta could do it, then I could too. We spent the next few months dating. I continued my unofficial therapy sessions with Bernie at our favorite bench. I'd been dating Lucas for 6 months when I decided to bring him along to meet Bernie. Since I didn't have parents for him to meet, I figured Bernie was the next best thing. Bernie beat us to the bench and was waiting when I approached with Lucas. "Hello, old man," I said. "This is Lucas." Bernie looked him up and down with a disapproving gaze. "So, this is him," he said gruffly, adding more bass to his voice than usual. "Yes, it is." I nudged Lucas closer, and he extended his hand towards Bernie. "It's nice to meet you, sir," Bernie responded with a limp handshake. Lucas pulled a familiar bag of candy out of his jacket pocket and extended them out to Bernie. "These are for you, sir. I heard they're your favorite." Bernie looked at the bag with disgust, and Lucas began to nervously look over towards me. A moment later, Bernie cracked a large grin. "I'm just messing with you, boy." He snatched the candy out of his hands. "He's not going to make you cry like the last one, is he?" Bernie asked. I gasped, and then lightly smacked him on the arm. "Bernie, chill. We don't talk about the last one anymore." He held up his hands in surrender. "You're right. You're right." He shot daggers over to Lucas. "You're not going to make her cry like the last one, right?" he said, with the blatant threat laced through the question. Lucas shook his head. "I wouldn't dream of it, sir." He actually did make me cry just 4 months later. We were doing our usual walk through the park when Lucas turned towards me and got down on one knee. Although we'd only been together 10 months, I knew he was the one. I cried out a yes, and the crowd surrounding us exploded in applause. "Lucy, girl!" I whirled around to the familiar voice. Bernie hobbled over towards me with flowers in hand. I knew he was a good one. "Bernie, I didn't know you'd be here." I wiped the tears away as I enveloped him in a hug. He winced slightly and I backed off. "Of course, sweetheart. Lucas gave me the heads up so I could get here early." He waved off my concerned face. "I'm fine, Lucy. This body is just not what it used to be. But I will put my hat in the ring now for being your flower girl." Bernie made it to my wedding. We dressed up his cane in white paper and attached flowers to it as he walked me down the aisle. It might not have been the fastest walk to the pulpit, but I wouldn't have changed it for the world. Bernie was there for all the other major events. He was one of the first ones into the room when my Charlotte was born. I had him sit on the bench and watch as she began taking her first steps. As Charlotte's walking grew more steady and turned to running, Bernie's became more slow. He began to struggle to make it to the middle of the park where our favorite bench was. Instead, we met at the beginning. His body began to fail him in those final days, but his mind never did. He was still as smart as a whip and was always telling tales about his life. He continued to give me compliments that not even Lucas could top. He told me how my world peace-saving smile was copied onto Charlotte's face and how she and I were unstoppable forces in this world. I began to sob, Lucas's hand rubbing my back and Charlotte hugging my legs. I look out towards the park, a sea of people in black staring back at me. He truly loved this place. I look down to the urn on the podium where I'm standing. Bernie touched so many hearts and souls. I know my speech was long-winded. Bernie would have told me to come up for air once in a while. A smattering of laughter rose from the crowd. He was my constant in this life, my unwavering friend. The only comfort I have is that I know Bernie is now with his dear Alberta. I fold up my papers and take my seat in the front row. Bernie's daughter clasps my hands as a new round of tears well up. His oldest daughter stands up, facing the crowd. Thank you all for coming. I know my dad would have loved having you all here. He would have given candy to everybody. I smiled at the comment, looking down at the almost empty bag in my purse. I still visited the park every day. I would watch Charlotte and Lucas from my favorite bench, this time with smiles and laughter instead of crying. The plaque on the bench was warm against my back. It read, "For Bernie, whose smile could solve world peace."